Hello, I'm Knut Elstermann. I'm a film journalist in Berlin, and I have now the great honor to welcome the director of our opening film of this year's festival, INCITEMENT. It's Yaron Zilberman, and it's a great honor to have you here. Unfortunately, not real, but to talk to you. Hello.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure talking to you.
So I remember very well your amazing movie, The Late Quartet, which was like a chamber play with the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of his best performances, I think. But this movie was really, really very different from this new movie, Incitement. There's a big difference, and I really would like to know, why did you undergo this very painful, I think it was a painful process to reconstruct these traumatic events in 1995, the assassination of the Prime Minister. So why did you do that? What was your motivation?
First of all, it's this is one of the most, I would say, meaningful traumas in Israel history. With Yom Kippur War, I regard these two traumas as the major event that changed Israel forever. So there's Israel before the assassination, Israel after the assassination, as a major turning point. So on a national level, as the Israeli narrative, so to speak, it's such an important event that I wanted to discuss it, talk about it, explore it, try to understand it more with the perspective of 24 years at that point. I started 5 years earlier to work on it, so the perspective of that at that point was about 20 years of distance. And of course, on a personal level, because I was part of the pro-Rabin, pro-peace movement, and for me, living in Israel at that time, having the assassination would really tear apart our sort of even belief in Israeli society. It was a taboo. We always said an Israeli prime minister will never be assassinated. This is something that belongs to other countries, to different cultures, to different way of, like, a Jew will not kill a Jewish prime minister. And because it was so out of our range of imagination, despite the fact that there were voices and before that were leading to it, we could not fathom such an event. And therefore, on a personal level, it was a trauma. On a national level, it was trauma. And I thought, if there's one story at that point that I wanted to tell about Israel, about my experience as Israeli, as a Jew, that was the story. So
Yeah. So, but didn't you hesitate for a moment? I mean, this is very, very delicate. You were talking about this traumatic event and the taboo. So how did you overcome maybe all these hesitations that I expect you have?
Yeah. So initially, when I had the idea to make this movie, it was about 7 years earlier. And I met a friend of mine who is a historian, and he told me, the meeting was in London. I showed my previous movie, and I said, okay, what would be my next movie? I had two ideas, and one of them was the Late Quartet, what became a Late Quartet, and the second one was this one. And I spoke to him about it, and he said, Yaron, it's too fresh, don't touch it yet. There might be a lot of information that will come up and be discovered, so you gotta wait longer. And also the Israeli public is not ready emotionally to deal with this story. So he convinced me not to touch it at that point, and I did not. Years later, when I finished, the Late Quartet and was working on other projects, I realized that now is the moment. So a producer approached me, Israeli producer, and says, what will make you make a movie? Because I'm living in New York currently. I mean, right now I'm in Tel Aviv, but most of the time my family is in New York. And so he asked me, I want you to make a movie in Israel. What would be that subject? I said, there's only one subject matter that I'm going to make a movie, and this was the story. So at that point I was ready. So my answer, the short answer, is that back then I wasn't experienced enough in filmmaking as an artist. I wasn't at the point where I felt that I can tell that story in terms of what you said, like, all these concerns. Now that I'm more experienced and having made a Late Quartet, I feel the opposite. When there's a story that you shouldn't touch, that's the story that I want to make. When I see something that is hard, that's where I'm drawn to do. So for me now, you ask me, whether it was sort of a subject matter that was too hot, like too explosive to touch, that's what I want to tell. So actually it was for me, yeah, we must do it. Not only that we'll do it, we'll make the story from the point of view of the assassin.
Yeah, and that's the interesting point, of course, and a great question. I remember those days very well, and I remember how hard it was for the whole world, by the way. It was really unbelievable things that happened. And I remember the question that a lot of people had, why this man, this Yigal Amir, why him? Because there was a very strong right-wing opposition to the peace negotiations and so on and so on. But why this guy? And in a way, for me, that's the main question in your movie as well.
Yes, it's a main question. It's true. It's the question is why him, but also the question in general, why? So there are two questions. I mean, you know, one can always answer why because of the various obvious reasons, but there are deeper reasons, and I wanted to explore that and why, and whether it was, what made him do it. So it's one thing to say, I want to kill him, right? Because we have an opposition to our thoughts, our culture, our way of living, and we always say, you know, you want to basically your position, you would like them to get away, right? Whatever side you are. But the difference is that you can protest, and protest is great, and everybody should protest and raise their voice and try to fight for their own way of life. However, there's a difference between this and violence. And so the question is, what made it such that these intentions became suddenly a violent act? And I would say this, there is a reason why this particular person succeeded in doing it. But why doing it? It was not a sole person. There were many people, many that wanted to assassinate Rabin, were thinking about it in many ways, planning to do it. But there was one person that succeeded in doing it, like actually being able to do it, because there were attacks on him before that. There were attacks on Rabin. But this particular person actually managed to do it. And the reason why I managed to do it is a combination of many things. In English, we call it perfect storm. So you have like so many things happening at the same time in order for something very extreme, very unique to happen. And that's what happened here. So first of all, he was sort of an Orthodox Jew from Herzliya, which is a city in the center of Israel. But the background was a Yemenite background who fell in love, was drawn with the world of the settlers, who are mainly Ashkenazi settlers. And so the idea of him wanting to be accepted to this particular group of people, you know, you can see his girlfriend in the movie, the two girlfriends are both Ashkenazi Jews. So he's drawn to these people, wanting to get their love, wanting to get their acceptance. So in a way, it already opens to maybe I can do something in order to get their admiration, love, because he feels rejected by them. And you can see that the two women rejects him at some point in the relationship. One of them was about to marry. So that's one aspect of this. This second aspect is, again, it's related to what I just said. There was an incitement, a bombardment of incitement from politicians, from rabbis, from the university that he studied in. And he was, in his psychology, was a kind of a guy that took things literally, which means, you know, you tell him that Rabin should be killed. For him, it's like, yeah, so Rabin should be killed. If he hears a logic why Rabin should be killed, which were biblical, you know, verses, biblical ideology that has to do with Maimonides, we call him Rambam, a major Jewish thinker that hundreds of years ago came up with ideas like what we call Din Rodef and Din Moser, which is the law of the pursuer and the law of the informer, that said that under certain circumstances, one should kill or one must kill. And he interpreted, and these were, let's say, assuming they were okay laws hundreds of years ago where Jews lived in the diaspora and were completely in the mercy of the ruler of the region that they were at, maybe that applied. But now, when the Jews have a country, Israel, none of these apply. So he was that kind of a person that took it literally. And he said, well, if you're not executing it, it's because you're cowards. I'm going to execute it because you tell me that I should do it. I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. So you have also a personality that takes these things literally and wanted to impress, you know, society around him. Also, again, and it has to do with the feeling of rejection that you just mentioned and a feeling of grandeur. But that's not enough. You also had to be able to infiltrate the zone where the security service covered in order to get to Rabin. And there he had two advantages. One advantage was that he was militarily trained. You know, most Orthodox Jews, especially during that time, today it's different, but back then they did not serve in the army. Orthodox Jews did not serve in the army, only some of them. But he was that kind of person that was also Zionist, also serving in the army in a combat unit, and it was a unit part of, you know, the forces of occupation, because he used to go during the Intifada into houses, you know, entering in the middle of the night and on one hand inflicting violence on his surrounding, but at the same time under risk of being killed. So he knew, and they claimed, his commander claimed that he was one of the bravest soldiers that he met. So you're talking about somebody very cold-blooded that can be under extreme situation of survival moment, and he can hold himself and act with rational, not being afraid. So that's a person that can infiltrate the zone where the security service around Rabin, around the prime minister, and still play as if he's just a bystander. Not only that, he played as if he's the guy from the security service that's supposed to find people like him and being able to find out. So, you know, so his military experience allowed him to do that. And also he was a Yemenite at that point. The drivers, those who drove the ministers, were Yemenites, just by almost a mistake. So he's a Yemenite. So they say, oh, he's one of the drivers. So you got all these things like a perfect storm working together. And, you know, from army, he knew how to operate a gun and bought it and practice it. Most Orthodox Jews don't have access to guns. They don't know how to operate the gun, etc. Of course, I'm generalizing, and I'm talking about very particular, because the settlers are very militant and very sort of, you know, go to the top army units, etc. But his type of orthodoxy was not part of that. So I gave you lots of reasons why this person succeeded, why he wanted. It's because of incitement. Incitement by politicians, mainly the head of opposition, today the prime minister, Bibi Netanyahu, and other rabbis, mainly from the settlements, very extreme, very, pro this action, because Rabin is giving land that belongs to the Jews by God. And if you break that covenant, therefore you're a traitor. And if you're a traitor, there's only one thing that you deserve, and that's death. And that's what he executed, that ideology.
You perfectly described right now the system of this whole movie for me, because I think it's what we call in German a Bildungsroman. That's a phrase also used in English, as far as I know. So it's about the education of a person, the way why he is that way he was. And this is perfect in this movie. And there's a lot of elements, you described it. And I could imagine it was quite difficult to understand there is a person surrounded by all this incitement, but on the other hand, he is a real person. He is a strong person, and he has his own kind of responsibility. It's not a way to explain everything, say, okay, he's not guilty because all the people influenced him so much. He is a person with an own mind and its own will.
Yeah, and I love what you said, because what you just mentioned, you touched on something that I have many conversations when I speak about the movie, because they say, the more you show the incitement, the less responsibility you put on him, and vice versa. And my answer is exactly what you said, which is very smart, which is, the answer is both. There's also personal responsibility, that I'm not taking an iota of responsibility from him shooting and murdering Rabin. At the same time, there's an incitement that put him into that state of mind, and these people are also responsible for the murder of Rabin. So the two work together, and both are responsible. And the more I show incitement, it doesn't take away from him, unless he had some kind of a mental incapability, things like that, which is a different story and not the story. I wanted to show that he's a real person, like myself, and under certain circumstances, he went to a place where I would never go, which is to inflict violence on another person, definitely that level of crazy violence.
Talking about responsibility, you have footage, of course, historical footage, archive footage in this movie, and we can now understand the parts that politicians played at that time. Like, for instance, Netanyahu was the opposition leader, and I heard there was some criticism in Israel about his part in your movie. Like, it's unfair to show him. Like, really, I say that way. He is responsible in a way for what happened.
There's no question that he's responsible. You can see in the movie, I added clips of him saying things that if you interpret it, just if we understand what he says, he basically says that Rabin is a traitor. He doesn't say it literally, he doesn't use that word, but I can say there's a clip there. It's not like my opinion. You just look at him and he says the following. He says, Rabin and Peres, Shimon Peres, together, conspired with the enemy, PLO, that's the enemy at the time, with the enemy, in order to demolish Israel democracy. So that's the definition of a traitor. A traitor is somebody who conspire with the enemy in order to attack their own society. So he says, the head of opposition, a man with such power, has so many followers, almost half of the country, if not a little bit more, listening to his words. And that's what he tells them. He says, this is a traitor. And, if you are young, you're 24 years old, you're zealous, you protest, the message is, we got to stop this man at all force because he's a traitor. This is one example. Another example that you see in the movie, he's at the site, on site, after a bus explosion, which means many, many Israelis are dead on the street, horrible, horrible, terrible attack. And he says, Rabin preferred the well-being of the Gazan people over the safety of the Israelis. Translation, Rabin cares about the Arabs, the enemy, to all these people, to his followers, to the safety of the Israelis, of the Jewish Israelis. That statement is really extreme. And again, if it's being said by the head of the opposition, there's a message there to these young, zealous people. Mm-hmm. And that's why he has major responsibility. The criticism I got is that Bibi also said there a couple of times on camera, 2-3 times, that he's in a protest, says one should not inflict violence on Rabin only in the polls when you vote. That's the only place to take him out. But for me, it's a joke. It's actually more extreme, because if you say that, it means that you realize that there's a danger of these people listening to you, these 100,000 people who are listening to you, there's a danger that they would think that maybe one should kill Rabin. So he says that as a small thing, but the statements that he says for a youngster is go and make an act. So for me, it's even worse. For them, it's the cover. Here, he said this, he said that. It's nothing. It's like this charismatic person, he's very charismatic, using very strong language, propagate the incitement against Rabin, and then throw a word that says, but no violence. It's a drop in the sea. And it's for me, it's the opposite, because what these people, when they hear him, they say, oh, he has to say it. He said it for the camera. And by the way, Galamir, in one of our, the assassin, we interviewed him, and he said that when these people, the rabbis and Bibi, they say these words, it's actually for the camera. It's not for them. It's for the camera, he says certain things. So that's the interpretation.
Yeah. So let's talk about this way of research. By the way, we should mention your co-author. It's Ron Leshem, amazing author, who, by the way, wrote the novel, the Beaufort novel. Yes. About Beaufort. So, yeah, amazing. So how did you work together, and how did you, for instance, work with Amir? You said you met him. Was he interested maybe to create a certain image? Was he interested maybe to have a certain kind of influence on your movie?
Yeah. So first about Ron Leshem. So I read a script that was written by Ron Leshem about Yom Kippur War, and at that time, and the script was so well written that it really impressed me by the quality of his writing. But at the same time, it wasn't the right time for me to make that project, and I skipped on it. But I remembered Ron Leshem as a great scriptwriter. And then when this movie came about, the idea, and the producer said, okay, let's make this movie. I said, I was occupied. I was already like in the midst of writing 2 other scripts. So I said, I won't be able to fully commit to writing it, but if I can have a co-writer, somebody to write with me, let's start. He says, okay, who do you want? And then I remembered Ron from writing this great script. So I said, okay, Ron Leshev, we met. We had an immediate bond. We spoke about the approach through the assassin's world, and we immediately said, we're going to make it. So the process of writing started. So we wrote together the treatment, and then he wrote the first draft. I continued to the second draft, etc., etc. So we had this great ping pong between us, which worked very well for us. And when I finished this movie, I took that script. He said, okay, now take a look at the script again. I read the script and I said, okay, now is the time. So that collaboration brought another project, which I'm currently editing, and it's coming out in October. Anyway, that's just
Happy to hear that.
how life works. In terms of Yigal Amir, so we decided that we want to actually talk to him. We did not talk to him directly. We spoke through our head of research. He spoke to him in jail over the phone. The idea, I didn't want to speak to him because of the reason you mentioned, so it won't influence me emotionally. I'm just going to ask questions, get answers, ask questions, get answers. We learned a lot from this. It was very important for me, and I wanted to get as much information as I can, even though he gives the information. So I knew that I should take it, with a grain of salt, because one should not trust him necessarily. Of course, he's a murderer, and we know what kind of person. But at the same time, interestingly enough, he is not lying about the events. That he, for example, he confessed to the murder. Mm. He reenacted to cameras the event, so he showed what he did, and he really revealed everything besides telling which rabbis told him, gave him permission, etc. That's why he did not want other people to get in trouble because of him. But otherwise, he really was very open. So I felt comfortable listening to him, and then I decided what to believe and what not to believe and how to use it. But it gave me, as a director, a wealth of knowledge on working with the actor, giving him the right direction. So I'm using whatever the world gives me.
You mentioned the actor, of course, and of course we should mention him right now. It's Yehuda Nahari Halevi, and a very important element of course, is amazing what he's doing in this movie, because he's very charming, and I'm hesitating to say that, but I like to watch him. I like to follow his way. I was entertained by him in a way, which is a dangerous thing to say, but it's great for the movie.
It's a movie. We have to remember that he is in every frame in the movie. I mean, not every frame, because sometimes he speaks, you see his back. But yeah, he's in the entire movie. When you have a person that leads you for 2 hours in his every scene and every shot, that person has to be very compelling in terms of his acting abilities, and also you have to be able to watch him. So that's why I think that he was the right actor, because he delivered fantastic acting. But also in terms of his looks, when I had to choose, what kind of person, because some people in Israel blame me, oh, he's too good looking, and Yigal Amir is not that good looking. My compass, my decision was based on the fact that two women that were very good looking, very attractive, I'm talking not just on the physical level, but attractive in terms of personality and in terms of wisdom and in terms of their social, how you call it? Their place in society in terms of being part of settlements of very respectful communities. And I said, so why would, he's from Herzliya, from Neve Amal, which is a community that at that time, a neighborhood at that time, was socially not, on the top of the earning. At that time, now, of course, it changes, but at that time, so I asked myself, in a society that, the settlement society that is very sort of, has that aspect of social status, why would that happen? And my answer was that because of his charisma, because of his looks, because he seems to them very sharp and smart and courageous and say the way things are and all these things. So I had to find somebody that would be attractive. And that's why, also physically attractive. And that's why I decided to go with somebody that, has that appeal. In terms of acting, so I did not know during auditions, but later he told me, after I chose him, he told me that he was born and grew up in the same neighborhood, few blocks away from where Yigal Amir is, that his family pray in the same synagogue that his family pray, and his brother used to play with him soccer. So suddenly everything connected. He was also Orthodox when he was young, also in the same kind of, you know, mentality in terms towards the religious world. And I realized I have this perfect person to portray him. And for the role, he went Orthodox, went to the synagogue 3 times a day, wore the kippah, of course, the tzitzit, everything in the clothes, shoes, everything, which is, you know, black and white type of dress. And he got into that role completely for months and months and months. And I saw him transition in front of my eyes. And at some point he also read all the information, all these words. He really got into his mind. And at some point he spoke to me and I was shocked that I'm talking to Yigal Amir actually. That was the major transition. I remember that phone call and I was like scared that I'm talking to him. And I realized, okay, now you're ready. So at that point, it was Yigal Amir, and we went through it. My only deal that I made with him while working on it is that I will not criticize Yigal Amir for that period of time with him. I'm just going to talk to him as if I actually with him in this journey, which for me as a director was very difficult because, you know, my opinion, of course, is 180 degrees opposite. But for that thing, I decided to go with him and not to make him conscious of any, you know, opinion, but rather, and also created a bubble around him. So the director of photography and everybody on set will not say, oh, you know, Yigal, I hate him, I wish he were dead, or criticize him, but rather not say a word. So we all pretended that we are with him. That gave him also the power of to go with the role all the way.
It's a great performance. Yehuda Nahari Halevi, we should remember that name, of course. So yeah. That leads me to my last question. For me, it's not just a movie about this assassination, of course it is, but it's also a movie about what democracy really means. How can you struggle for a goal? How can you deal with conflicts, even so harsh conflicts that you have in Israel, as we all know. So what do you hope maybe for that movie? And in a way, it's a reflection of the still going impact of that event on the Israeli society.
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, I think that the main thing about what Yigal Amir did, he was actually trying to kill democracy. He killed the prime minister, but the prime minister represents democracy because one of the highlights of the democratic process is for all of us to have an equal voice by voting and get our leaders, and the leaders form the coalition and they lead the country based on the will of the people. So I think that killing that prime minister is actually trying to kill democracy. And so for me, that's like the most important thing. And the movie itself, you know, on the 24th anniversary of Rabin's assassination, and the memorial, it happens in the same location where he was assassinated, which is today it's called Rabin Square. So there's an event. We screened 3 clips from the movie, and I spoke in front of, you know, its audience of 50,000 people, and we already spread that news on the national level. This November 4th, will be the 25th year from his death, and the whole event now is a screening of the movie. It's the first time in Israel that they will screen a movie that tens of thousands of people would watch together as a community, and reflecting on that event on location. And they're going to have the shot in the movie coincide in, you know, the same time, 9:42, where the shot happened in reality. So we are going to relive that moment and again understand the impact of that assassination, which I think changed Israel forever. So that's I hope that the movie will make that impact, not just when it came out, but for a long, long time. People would be able to watch it also as a signpost, like as a warning sign, that says, look, this is where we're heading. If we're going to continue with incitement, we're going to continue to incite people to violence, eventually a murder happens. And it can be all sort of different kind of murders. One of them is, important leaders of society. So I hope that that's what's going to continue to happen with the movie.
Yaron, thank you so much. It was a great honor to talk to you. Yaron Zilberman, he is the director of the movie Incitement, opening film of this year's Jewish Film Festival in Berlin and Brandenburg. Thank you so much. Toda rabba.
Toda rabba lecha. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bye.